A blizzard rages outside as a man hears a desperate knock at his door. When he opens it, his heart nearly stops. Two tiny twin girls, barefoot and trembling, stand before him, their little hands pressed together in silent prayer. One of them collapses into the snow. Without thinking, he sweeps them into his arms, rushing them inside. But the moment he sees their faces in the firelight, something inside him shatters. He instantly bursts into tears, because these girls look exactly like someone he lost decades ago. Who are they? How did they end up alone in the freezing cold? And what secret do they hold that will change everything? Stay with us for a heart-wrenching story of loss, love, and the miracle that no one saw coming. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The grandfather clock in Rose Bennett's living room chimed 9, its deep resonance barely audible over the howling wind outside. Rose pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, her arthritic fingers clutching a cup of tea that had long since gone lukewarm. The dancing flames in the fireplace cast flickering shadows across her face as she gazed through frost-kissed windows at the relentless snowfall, watching ice crystals form delicate patterns in the corners of the glass. Harold would have loved a night like this, she whispered to the empty room, her voice catching slightly. 5 years had passed since her husband's death, but the silence still felt wrong. Their Victorian home, once filled with laughter and life, now echoed with memories that only made the loneliness sharper. Even the creaking of the old radiators seemed to mock the absence of his warm presence. She thought of Michael, their son, probably tucking his own children into bed on the other side of the country. The Christmas card he'd sent last week sat unopened on the side table. She couldn't bring herself to read it just yet. Her fingers had traced its edges dozens of times, but the courage to face those cheerful family photos hadn't come. The house creaked and settled around her, its familiar sounds a poor substitute for real company. Rose set her teacup down with a gentle clink. "I used to pray for peace and quiet," she murmured, watching snowflakes swirl in the yellow glow of the porch light, creating ghostly patterns in the darkness. Funny how God answers prayers in ways we don't expect. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken regret. A sudden knock at the door made her jump, spilling a few drops of tea onto her lap. She froze, straining to hear over the wind. There it came again, faint but unmistakable, desperate somehow, like a frightened bird beating against glass. Who in heaven's name? Rose's heart quickened. Nobody visited after dark, especially not in weather like this. The knocking grew more urgent, each rap seeming weaker than the last, fading like a dying heartbeat. Using the armchair for support, Rose pushed herself to her feet, wincing at the stiffness in her joints. She grabbed her housecoat from its hook, wrapping it around herself as she made her way to the door. The old floorboards protested beneath her careful steps, each creak a reminder of the home's age. Her hand hesitated on the deadbolt. Common sense told her not to open her door to strangers at night, but something about that weakening knock tugged at her heart. The wind howled louder, rattling the windows, almost drowning out the increasingly feeble tapping. Her teacher's instincts, honed over decades, sensed something wasn't right. "Lord, give me wisdom," Rose breathed, then turned the lock with trembling fingers. The bitter wind nearly yanked the door from her grip as she pulled it open. At first, she saw nothing but swirling snow. Then her gaze dropped lower, and her breath caught in her throat, her heart seeming to stop for a moment. Two tiny figures stood huddled together on her porch like lost angels in the storm. Little girls, identical down to their soaked nightgowns and terror-filled eyes. They couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Their dark hair was dusted with snow, their small bodies shaking violently from the cold, their bare feet nearly blue against the frozen concrete. One girl, slightly taller than her sister, kept her arm protectively around the smaller one. The smaller twin swayed on her feet, her lips blue, eyelids fluttering like butterfly wings about to still. "Please, lady," the taller twin whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Please help us." Before Rose could move, the smaller girl's knees buckled. She crumpled like a paper doll, falling face first into the gathering snow. Rose lunged forward with a speed she hadn't known she still possessed, scooping the unconscious child into her arms. The other twin latched onto Rose's sleeve, her tiny fingers digging in with desperate strength, leaving small wrinkles in the fabric. The icy wind cut through Rose's nightclothes, but she barely felt it. All she could think about was getting these children inside, away from the deadly cold. She backed into the house, clutching the limp child to her chest while her sister clung to her arm like a lifeline. With one powerful movement, Rose kicked the door shut, sealing out the howling storm and the darkness that had delivered these angels to her doorstep. Rose's hands trembled as she laid the unconscious twin on her floral print couch, her heart hammering against her ribs. The little girl's skin felt like ice, her dark curls matted with melting snow. Small puddles formed where the wet strands touched the fabric. Without wasting a moment, Rose grabbed the thick wool blanket from her reading chair and wrapped it tightly around the child's tiny frame, tucking the edges carefully beneath her. "Please, sweetheart," Rose whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "Please be okay. Just hold on." The other twin stood rooted near the door, her small body rigid with fear. Her eyes, wide and watchful, never left her sister. Rose could see her shivering violently in her wet nightgown, her teeth chattering audibly in the quiet room. "Come here, dear," Rose called softly, reaching for another blanket. "You're freezing too. Let me help you get warm." The girl didn't move. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself, water dripping steadily onto the hardwood floor, creating a small puddle around her bare feet. Rose hurried to the linen closet, her joints protesting the sudden movement with sharp twinges of pain, and returned with an armful of fresh towels. Working quickly but gently, she began dabbing the moisture from the unconscious child's face and hair, her movements careful and maternal. "I need to get you both out of these wet clothes," Rose explained, keeping her voice gentle and reassuring. She carefully peeled away the soaked nightgown from the smaller twin and wrapped her in a soft flannel blanket, making sure to cover every inch of cold skin. A weak whimper escaped the child's blue-tinged lips, making Rose's chest tighten with worry and fear. Finally, the standing twin took a hesitant step forward, then another, her movements cautious like a frightened fawn, until she stood close enough for Rose to wrap her in warmth too. As Rose helped her out of her wet clothes and into a blanket, tucking it securely around her shoulders, she noticed how the girl's eyes never left her sister's face, watching for any sign of movement. Rose leaned closer to check on the unconscious child, and suddenly, the world seemed to stop spinning. Her hands froze mid-motion as she truly saw their faces for the first time in the soft lamplight. The same delicate features, the same dark curls, the same perfect bow-shaped lips, just like her boys. The resemblance was so striking it stole her breath away. Memories she'd locked away for 50 years came rushing back with crushing force, like a tidal wave breaking through a weathered seawall. The nursery she'd painted pale blue, filling it with 2 identical cribs and matching mobiles. The soft baby blankets she'd lovingly embroidered with their names, staying up late into the night to make them perfect. The terrible silence that followed their too early arrival, when there should have been crying. The unbearable weight of 2 tiny caskets that should never have been made, no bigger than shoeboxes. Rose's vision blurred as tears welled up in her eyes, turning the room into a watery kaleidoscope. She tried to hold them back, to stay strong for these children who needed her steady presence. But the dam had already broken. A sob escaped her throat, then another, until her whole body shook with the force of 50 years of buried grief, each tear carrying decades of unspoken sorrow. The conscious twin watched Rose cry with a mixture of confusion and concern on her small face, her own troubles momentarily forgotten. Then, slowly, cautiously, she reached out and placed her cold little hand on Rose's knee. The touch was gentle, almost comforting, like a butterfly landing on a flower, as if this tiny child understood something about pain that no 3-year-old should ever have to comprehend. Rose felt something crack open inside her chest, a door she'd sealed shut decades ago, protecting herself from the raw ache of loss. But now, with this small hand offering comfort, that door began to open, letting in both pain and possibility. Grief and hope intertwined like old friends finally reuniting. The little girl's hand remained steady on Rose's knee, a silent anchor in the storm of emotions. For the first time in 50 years, Rose allowed herself to feel the full weight of her grief, there in her living room with two lost children who looked so much like the ones she'd never had the chance to hold, to love, to watch grow. In that moment, past and present merged, and Rose felt something she hadn't dared feel in decades: purpose. The wind howled outside like an angry beast, but inside Rose's living room, the crackling fire fought back against the darkness. Rose wiped her eyes with trembling fingers, forcing herself to take deep breaths. These little girls needed her to be strong now. There would be time for tears later. Her teacher's instincts, honed over decades in the classroom, told her these children had endured far too much already. "Let me look at those hands and feet, sweethearts," she said softly, keeping her voice steady and gentle. The smaller twin, Lily, whimpered as Rose carefully examined her tiny fingers. They were red and swollen from the cold, but thankfully showed no signs of serious frostbite. Emma stayed rigid, her dark eyes following Rose's every movement, tracking each small gesture as if memorizing potential threats. "It might hurt a little," Rose explained, beginning to gently massage Lily's hands to get the blood flowing properly again. "But this will help make them feel better soon." Lily let out a small cry of pain, tears welling up in her eyes. Her sister tensed at the sound, muscles coiling tight beneath her thin nightgown. "Shh, I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts," Rose soothed, her heart aching at the child's distress. "You're being so brave." She hummed an old lullaby as she worked, one she used to sing to her own babies all those years ago. The familiar melody brought a fresh wave of memories, but she pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. Emma inched closer, her small body tense like a coiled spring. Rose could see the protective instinct in her eyes. This 3-year-old was ready to snatch her sister away at the first sign of danger. The thought made Rose's chest tighten with sadness. No child should have to be so vigilant, so afraid. "Would you like some warm milk?" Rose asked, keeping her voice light. "It might help warm you up from the inside." Both girls stared at her blankly, neither moving to accept or refuse. Rose noticed how they didn't speak, didn't ask questions like typical 3-year-olds would. These children had learned to be silent, and that knowledge broke her heart. She wondered what circumstances had taught them such unnatural stillness. Rose reached for the thick patchwork quilt draped over her rocking chair, the one Harold's mother had made for their wedding. She wrapped it around both girls, making sure they were snug near the fire's warmth. The familiar scent of home seemed to have a calming effect on Lily, who gradually relaxed against Rose's side, her small fingers clutching at the worn fabric. Emma remained alert, but Rose noticed how her small fingers crept forward to grasp the edge of Rose's sleeve. It was a tiny gesture, but it spoke volumes. This fierce little protector was exhausted, fighting against her own need for comfort. Her eyelids would droop, then snap back open, determination written across her young face. "You're safe here," Rose whispered, more to herself than to them. "You're safe now." She watched the flames dance in the fireplace, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. These children had been through something terrible. That much was clear from their behavior. The nightgowns they'd worn were thin and dirty, their hair tangled and unwashed. Someone had neglected these precious little ones, left them to wander in a snowstorm. The thought made her blood boil even as she maintained her gentle demeanor. Rose held them close, careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten them. The fire popped and crackled, casting warm light across their faces. In the flickering glow, Rose could see exhaustion starting to overtake even Emma's vigilant expression. Her fierce little guardian was fighting a losing battle with sleep. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know where these children had come from or who had hurt them. But in this moment, with two small bodies huddled against her, Rose knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would protect them. Whatever came next, these girls would not face it alone. Her quiet home had felt empty for so long, but now it seemed to pulse with new purpose, wrapping around these lost little ones like a protective embrace. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11, its gentle chimes barely audible over the howling storm. Rose sat motionless on her floral print couch, The twins nestled against her like two small birds seeking shelter. Lily's breathing had finally steadied, her small chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of sleep. Emma, though still tense, had given in to exhaustion, her tiny fingers clutching Rose's sleeve even in slumber. Their damp hair had dried into soft tangles against her shoulder. The warmth from the fireplace had done its work, bringing color back to their pale cheeks. The dancing flames cast a gentle glow across their faces, highlighting the delicate curve of their noses and the dark sweep of their eyelashes. Rose's arthritis complained as she held them, but she didn't dare move. For the first time in decades, her empty house felt like a home again, filled with the quiet sounds of children's breathing and the subtle weight of trust. Bright headlights suddenly cut through the darkness, sweeping across her front window like searching fingers. The harsh beam illuminated the falling snow, creating eerie shadows that danced across her walls. The wind rattled the window panes, making the moment feel even more ominous. Rose's heart skipped a beat as she heard the crunch of tires on snow, followed by the distinctive slam of a car door. Emma stirred against her side, making a small sound of distress. Her fingers tightened their grip on Rose's sleeve. Rose instinctively tightened her hold on both girls, her throat tight with fear. Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow, each step bringing whoever it was closer to her door, the sound growing more distinct with every passing second. With trembling hands, Rose carefully extracted herself from the sleeping children, tucking the quilts around them with gentle precision. Her joints protested as she stood, but she ignored the pain, focusing instead on making sure the girls were warm and secure. Moving to the window, she pulled back the lace curtain just enough to peek outside, the old fabric rough against her fingers. A police officer stood on her porch, his uniform dusted with snow. The sight made her stomach clench with dread. In the glow of her porch light, she could see he was young, probably in his early 30s, with broad shoulders and a serious expression. His badge gleamed dully in the dim light. His breath came out in white puffs as he stamped his feet, trying to stay warm in the bitter cold. Rose's mind raced, thoughts tumbling over each other like leaves in a storm. Had someone reported the girls missing? Would they take them away? The thought of losing them, just when they'd found their way to her, made her feel physically ill. She glanced back at the twins, so small and vulnerable on her couch. Lily whimpered in her sleep, her face scrunching up with some unknown fear, and Emma unconsciously reached for her sister's hand, their fingers intertwining even in sleep. The knock, when it came, was firm and official. 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through her quiet house like thunderclaps. Rose smoothed down her house dress with shaking hands, trying to gather her courage. The worn cotton under her fingers reminded her of simpler days, when unexpected visitors didn't carry such weight. She had to protect these children. But how? Taking a deep breath, she shuffled toward the door, her slippers whispering against the hardwood floor. Each step felt like a mile. The brass doorknob felt cold under her fingers as she reached for it, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The metal seemed to burn with winter's chill, a stark reminder of the harsh world waiting outside her warm sanctuary. Rose's fingers trembled as she opened the door wider, letting Officer Reynolds step inside. The warmth from the fireplace rushed out into the cold night air before she quickly shut the door behind him. Snow melted off his dark uniform, creating small puddles on her wooden floor. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes with its fury. "Mrs. Bennet," he said softly, removing his hat and brushing a few lingering snowflakes from his graying hair. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he glanced at the twins huddled behind her legs. "I'm Officer Mark Reynolds." The girls pressed closer to Rose, their tiny hands clutching her thick flannel robe. She could feel their bodies trembling, though whether from fear or cold, she couldn't tell. The fabric of their thin hospital gowns offered little protection against the winter chill. "Please come sit down," she said, gesturing to her well-worn floral armchair. Officer Reynolds settled into the chair, pulling out a small notebook from his breast pocket. The leather cover was worn, its edges softened by years of use. His movements were deliberate, careful not to startle the children. "We got a call from the hospital," he began, his voice gentle but professional. "2 little girls were left outside the emergency entrance around 7 tonight. Security cameras showed a woman running away. He paused, looking at the twins with compassion in his eyes. "I assume these are the same girls?" Rose nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She sat on the couch, and the twins immediately climbed up beside her, pressing close like frightened birds seeking shelter. The younger one, Lily, buried her face in Rose's side, while Emma's watchful eyes never left the officer. "Social Services has been notified," he continued, pen poised above the paper. "They'll arrange emergency foster care." "Let me keep them," Rose interrupted, the words bursting from her before she could stop them. Her hands shook as she wrapped an arm around each girl, drawing them closer to her warmth. Officer Reynolds looked up from his notebook, his pen hovering mid-sentence. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "you're old?" Rose's voice came out sharp like the crack of a whip. "I know how old I am, and I know what it means to lose a child." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with decades of grief. The ancient grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking each moment of silence. The officer shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. His boots squeaked against the hardwood floor. "Mrs. Bennett, there are procedures we have to follow. Protocols." "These girls need stability," Rose insisted, her teacher's conviction evident in every word. "They need someone who understands what they've been through." She looked down at Emma, who was watching the officer with wary eyes that seemed too old for her young face. "I was a teacher for 40 years. I know children. I can help them." Officer Reynolds studied her for a long moment. The fire popped and crackled in the silence, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Finally, he sighed, closing his notebook with a soft snap. "I'll talk to Social Services," he said slowly. "But I want you to understand, this won't be easy. There will be home visits, background checks, evaluations." "I don't care," Rose said firmly, her chin lifting with determination. "Whatever it takes." He stood up, tucking the notebook away in his pocket. "I'll be back tomorrow with a social worker. For now." He glanced at the twins, his expression softening. "For now, they can stay here tonight. It's too late to move them anyway." Rose walked him to the door, watching as he disappeared into the swirling snow. Through the frost-edged window, she could see his patrol car's headlights cutting through the darkness like beacons. Her hands gripped her teacup tightly, the ceramic warm against her cold fingers as she silently prayed she'd have the strength for what lay ahead. The morning light filtered weakly through Rose's frost-covered windows, casting pale shadows across the living room floor. Her neck ached fiercely from sleeping upright on the couch, but she didn't dare move. The twins were still nestled against her, their small bodies radiating warmth like tiny furnaces. Emma's fingers remained tangled in Rose's sleeve, holding on even in sleep, her grip surprisingly strong for such a small child, while Lily's head rested heavily in her lap, her soft breath steady and rhythmic. Rose watched their peaceful faces, her heart swelling with an emotion she hadn't felt in decades. In the quiet morning light, their resemblance to her lost sons was even more striking, almost painfully so. The same dark curls, the same delicate features, even the same way their eyelashes fanned against their cheeks. She pushed the memory away with practiced determination. This wasn't about her past. This was about their future, about giving these precious girls the stability they desperately needed. The sharp knock made all three of them jump. Emma's grip tightened instantly, her eyes wide with fear, scanning the room for danger. Lily whimpered, pressing closer to Rose, her small body trembling. "It's okay, sweethearts," Rose whispered, carefully standing despite her protesting joints. "Stay right here. I won't let anything happen to you." She opened the door to find a woman in her late 30s, dressed in a neat gray suit and clutching a clipboard to her chest. Behind her, fresh snow sparkled under the morning sun like scattered diamonds, nearly blinding in its brightness. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm Claire Donovan from Social Services." Her voice was professional but not unkind, carrying the weight of experience. "May I come in?" Rose stepped aside, watching as Claire's keen eyes took in every detail of her home. The worn furniture that spoke of years of use, the dated wallpaper with its faded floral pattern, the the neatly kept but clearly old carpet that had seen better days. "The girls seem comfortable with you," Claire noted, glancing at the twins still huddled on the couch, their small forms pressed together like frightened birds. "They are." Rose straightened her spine despite the arthritis that made it protest with sharp twinges. "And I want to keep them. They need a home. A real home." Claire's pen paused mid-note. "Mrs. Bennett, you're not an approved foster parent. There's a process, regulations that must be followed." "Then approve me." Rose's voice was firm, carrying the authority of her teaching years. "I have a spare bedroom upstairs. I own this house outright. I have savings, and my pension is adequate. These girls deserve stability." "It's not just about money." Claire's eyes softened slightly, showing a glimpse of genuine concern. "You're 72. Caring for toddlers is physically demanding. There are health considerations, safety concerns. We have to think about the long term." "I taught elementary school for 40 years, Rose countered, her chin lifting. "I know children. I know their needs. These girls need stability, not another temporary placement where they'll be separated again." Claire walked through the house, making notes with quick, efficient strokes. She checked the kitchen cupboards, the bathroom, the spare room upstairs with its cheerful yellow walls. Rose followed, answering questions about her income, her health, her support system, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "Your son lives in California?" Claire asked, frowning at her notes, her pen tapping against the paper. "He does, but I have friends here. The church community has always—" "Mrs. Bennett," Claire interrupted gently, her tone carrying years of similar conversations. "I understand you want to help, but we have to consider what's best for the children in every aspect. What's best is keeping them together with someone who already cares about them." Rose's voice cracked slightly, betraying her emotion. "Someone who will fight for them, who will put them first always." Claire closed her notebook with a soft snap, her expression thoughtful but unconvinced. "I'll review your case, but please understand, the odds aren't in your favor. The system has certain requirements." After Claire left, Rose stood at the door for a moment, her hand pressed against her racing heart, feeling its wild rhythm beneath her palm. Behind her, she heard a small sniffle. Turning, she saw Emma watching her with those two wise eyes that seemed to understand everything, while Lily clung to her sister's hand like a lifeline. "I will fight for you," Rose whispered, more to herself than to them, her determination growing stronger with each breath. "I promise, no matter what it takes." The night wrapped around Rose's house like a thick blanket, muffling the world outside. Inside, the warmth from the heating vent hummed softly as Rose arranged pillows and blankets on her king-sized bed. She'd pulled out her softest sheets, the ones she saved for special occasions, and made a cozy nest for the twins. The pale blue cotton felt like clouds beneath her weathered hands as she smoothed out every wrinkle, wanting everything to be perfect. "See? We'll all sleep right here together," Rose said, her voice gentle. Lily clutched her borrowed nightgown, one of Rose's old t-shirts that hung like a dress on her tiny frame. The fabric pooled around her feet like a cotton puddle. Emma stood rigid nearby, her eyes darting between Rose and the door, her shoulders tense under her own oversized shirt. "Nobody's going anywhere," Rose assured them, patting the bed. "We're all staying right here." She kept her movements slow and predictable, like approaching scared rabbits. It took some coaxing, but finally both girls settled into the middle of the bed, creating a small depression in the mattress. Rose lay down beside them, leaving the bedside lamp on. Its warm glow cast soft shadows on the wall as she watched their breathing slowly steady, their small bodies finally relaxing into sleep. The peace lasted only a few hours. A whimper broke through the quiet, growing into heart-wrenching sobs. Lily thrashed under the covers, her face twisted in fear, small legs kicking at invisible terrors. Rose moved quickly but carefully, gathering the trembling child into her arms. "Shh, sweetheart. You're safe. You're safe here with me," Rose whispered, rocking gently. Lily's tears soaked through Rose's nightgown, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric desperately, knuckles white with tension. Emma sat up instantly, alert and worried but keeping her distance. Her dark eyes watched Rose's every move, measuring, assessing, ready to intervene if needed. The moonlight streaming through the window caught the determination in her young face. Rose began to hum softly, an old lullaby she hadn't sung in 50 years. The melody came back easily, as if it had been waiting all this time in some dusty corner of her memory. "Hush now, my darling. Be still now, don't cry." The words flowed from somewhere deep in her heart, where she'd locked away so many memories of singing to her own children. Lily's sobs gradually quieted to hiccups, her small body still trembling but less violently now. Her grip on Rose's nightgown loosened slightly, but she didn't let go completely. Rose continued humming, stroking Lily's back in slow circles, feeling each shuddering breath begin to calm. Then something shifted. Emma, who had maintained her careful distance, leaned forward slightly. Her small body swayed with uncertainty before she finally rested her head against Rose's arm. The contact was light, barely there, but it felt monumental. Rose could feel the child's rapid heartbeat through that tiny point of connection. Rose's heart swelled, but she kept her voice steady, kept humming the familiar tune. She didn't move, didn't want to break this fragile moment of trust. Emma's weight grew heavier against her arm as the little girl gradually relaxed, her vigilance slowly melting into exhaustion. The night deepened around them. Snow began falling again outside, adding to the hushed feeling in the room. Each flake caught the streetlight's glow as it drifted past the window. Lily's breathing evened out as she drifted back to sleep, her small hand still clutching Rose's nightgown. Emma remained pressed against Rose's arm, her eyes growing heavy but fighting to stay open, determined to keep watch even as sleep pulled at her. As the first hints of dawn began to color the sky in gentle pinks and purples, Rose looked down at the two small heads resting against her. Something unexpected bloomed in her chest, a feeling she thought she'd never experience again. Love, pure and fierce, filled her heart until it ached. These girls, who had appeared on her doorstep like angels in the snow, had somehow already claimed a piece of her soul. Their presence had awakened something she thought had died long ago, bringing warmth back to the empty corners of her life. Sunlight streamed through Rose's bedroom window, casting a golden glow across the sleeping twins. Emma's small hand still gripped Rose's sleeve with surprising strength, while Lily had curled into a tight ball against her side, thumb hovering near her mouth. Rose carefully extracted herself, moving with the deliberate slowness of age, not wanting to wake them just yet. In the kitchen, she switched on her old coffee maker, its familiar gurgle breaking the morning silence. Her hands trembled slightly as she measured the grounds. 2 scoops, just like Harold had taught her all those years ago, back when mornings meant shared crossword puzzles and gentle teasing. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, wrapping around her like an old friend and giving her the boost of courage she needed. The twins appeared in the doorway like little ghosts, their matching dark curls tousled from sleep, yesterday's clothes wrinkled and askew. They watched her with wide, wary eyes as she moved around the kitchen, their small bodies tense with uncertainty, shoulders hunched as if preparing for disappointment. "Would you like some breakfast, dears?" Rose asked softly, keeping her movements slow and predictable. Emma shook her head, positioning herself slightly in front of her sister, but Lily's stomach growled loudly, making her duck her head in embarrassment, fingers clutching at her worn shirt. Rose pulled on her warmest wool coat, the burgundy one she'd worn to church for 20 years, its familiar weight settling on her shoulders like armor. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons as she dialed Officer Reynolds' number, arthritis making them stiff in the morning chill. "Mrs. Bennett," he answered, his voice tired and slightly exasperated. "I was just about to call you." "What's the status of my application?" she demanded, her voice firm despite her racing heart, years of teaching experience lending authority to her tone. "It's not that simple," he sighed, papers rustling in the background. "There are procedures, evaluations." "Make it simple," Rose cut him off, steel entering her voice. "These girls need stability, not procedures. They need a home, not paperwork." After hanging up, Rose bundled the twins in warm blankets she'd pulled from her linen closet, wrapping them snugly before loading them into her old Buick. The courthouse loomed ahead, its brick facade stern and imposing against the winter sky. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Rose marched down the hallway, holding a twin's hand in each of hers, their tiny fingers cold against her palm. Claire Donovan intercepted them near the clerk's office, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a metronome of bureaucracy. "Mrs. Bennett, these things take time," she explained, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "We have to do home studies, background checks." "Then start them," Rose replied, lifting her chin, drawing on every ounce of dignity she'd earned in her 72 years. "Today. Now I won't let these girls get lost in the system while we wait for paperwork to shuffle between desks." "You have to understand," Claire continued, her voice softening with what might have been pity. "Even if we expedite everything, it could take weeks, maybe months." Rose straightened her spine, feeling every one of her 72 years but refusing to show weakness, the weight of the twins' trust heavy on her shoulders. "Then we better get started, hadn't we?" She spent the next 3 hours filling out forms, answering questions, and insisting on her rights to apply for emergency foster care. Her hand cramped from writing, but she didn't complain. The twins stayed close, their small bodies pressed against her legs as if drawing strength from her presence, flinching at every loud noise or sudden movement. As they left the courthouse, the cold January air bit at Rose's cheeks and made her joints ache. But inside, determination burned like a furnace, warming her from within. She might be old, might be alone, but she would fight with everything she had. These girls needed her and she needed them. It was as simple as that. Some things, she knew, were worth any battle. The evening shadows lengthened across Rose's living room as she watched the twins play with some old building blocks she'd found in the closet. Their tiny hands moved in perfect sync, building and rebuilding small towers without exchanging a single word. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the soft click of wooden blocks against each other. "Would you like some apple juice?" Rose asked gently, holding up 2 small cups. The twins froze, their eyes meeting in that peculiar way they had. Emma's fingers twitched slightly, and Lily's head tilted a fraction to the right. Without a word spoken, they seemed to reach a decision. Both girls shook their heads in unison. Rose's heart ached. In all her years of teaching, she'd never seen children so withdrawn. Even during playtime, they remained eerily quiet. No giggles, no squabbles, no excited shouts when their tower grew taller. Just silence and those meaningful glances they shared. "The blue block would look nice on top," Rose suggested, pointing to a forgotten piece near her foot. Again, that silent exchange between the sisters. Emma's eyes flickered to Lily's face, and Lily's shoulders tensed slightly. Neither moved to take the block. Rose sat in her armchair, pretending to read while actually watching them closely. Their movements were careful, calculated, as if they'd learned to make themselves as quiet as possible. When Lily accidentally knocked over their tower, she didn't cry out in surprise or frustration. Instead, her lower lip trembled and Emma immediately grabbed her hand, squeezing it 3 times. "It's okay to make noise," Rose said softly. "It's okay to laugh or cry or talk." The words hung in the air, met with more silence. During dinner, Rose noticed how they waited for each other before taking a bite, how they checked with quick glances to make sure the other was okay. They ate methodically, without spilling a single crumb, as if they'd been punished for making messes before. Bath time proved equally challenging. The girls allowed Rose to wash them, but their eyes remained locked on each other the entire time. When Rose hummed a lullaby, trying to make the moment lighter, Lily's eyes welled with tears. Emma's hand shot out instantly, finding her sister's fingers under the bubbles. As bedtime approached, Rose helped them into fresh pajamas she'd bought that morning. "These are just for you," she told them, smoothing the soft fabric. "Your very own." For a moment, Lily's mouth opened as if she might speak, but then she caught Emma's eye and the moment passed. Now sitting in the dim light of her bedroom, Rose watched their sleeping forms. Even in sleep, they gravitated toward each other, their small hands clasped together. The moonlight cast a gentle glow on their faces, making them look even more vulnerable. How do I reach them, she wondered, her heart heavy with concern. These precious girls had built walls around themselves, communicating in a language only they understood. Rose knew the walls were there for a reason. They'd been hurt, scared, or both. Breaking through wouldn't be easy, but as she watched them sleep, she silently promised to try. The morning sun painted golden stripes across Rose's kitchen floor, casting warm shadows that danced with each passing cloud. She moved slowly, her joints stiff from sleeping on the couch, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The twins sat at the kitchen table, perched on phone books she'd found to help them reach their plates, their small feet dangling in the air. "Pancakes," Rose announced, trying to keep her voice gentle and warm like a summer breeze. "My mother's special recipe." She watched as Emma and Lily exchanged quick glances, their identical faces showing matching uncertainty, their hands clasped tightly beneath the table. The kitchen smelled of butter and maple syrup, the sweet aroma filling every corner of the room. Rose had shaped the pancakes into little hearts, remembering how her own boys had loved special shapes at breakfast time. She set the plates down carefully, her hands trembling slightly from age, the china making soft clicking sounds against the wooden table. "Would you like some milk?" she asked, not expecting an answer. The girls hadn't spoken a word all morning, communicating only through subtle looks and tiny gestures, a silent language all their own. As Rose reached for the spoons in the drawer, her arthritis made her fingers clumsy and uncooperative. The metal spoon slipped from her grasp, clattering against the linoleum floor with a musical ping that echoed through the quiet kitchen. Then it happened. A small, clear giggle broke the silence like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Lily, the younger twin, covered her mouth with both hands, but her eyes danced with amusement. The sound was like wind chimes on a summer breeze, delicate and unexpected, a precious gift in the morning stillness. Emma leaned close to her sister, cupping her tiny hand around Lily's ear, her dark eyes watchful. Rose pretended to be busy wiping the spoon clean, but she caught the whispered words, "Funny noise." The words floated across the kitchen like dandelion seeds in the wind. It was the first time she'd heard Emma's voice. It was soft and hesitant, like a bird testing its wings. But it was there, real and beautiful in its uncertainty. Rose's heart swelled with joy, but she kept her face calm, maintaining the peaceful atmosphere. She didn't want to frighten them back into silence by making too much of this precious moment. Instead, she hummed quietly as she finished serving breakfast, letting them feel safe in their small step forward, like tender plants reaching toward the sun. Throughout the day, Rose noticed subtle changes unfolding like petals opening to morning light. Lily's eyes followed her more openly now, curiosity replacing fear. Emma's grip on her sister's hand loosened slightly, allowing them both more freedom to move around the living room, exploring their new environment with cautious interest. When evening came, Rose settled into her well-worn armchair with a book of children's stories, the leather soft and familiar beneath her. She didn't expect the girls to join her, but she left space on either side, just in case. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and outside stars began to appear in the clear winter sky like diamonds scattered on velvet. She was halfway through Goodnight Moon when she felt it, a small weight pressing against her leg, gentle as a butterfly's landing. Emma stood there, looking up at her with those solemn eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years. Then slowly, deliberately, the little girl climbed into Rose's lap, her movements careful and measured. Rose's breath caught in her throat, her heart drumming a quiet symphony of hope. She sat perfectly still, afraid the slightest movement might break this fragile moment of trust, like disturbing morning frost on a window pane. Emma's small body was tense at first, but gradually she relaxed against Rose's chest, her warmth seeping through Rose's sweater. With trembling hands, Rose gently wrapped her arms around the child, cradling her as if she were made of precious glass. Emma didn't pull away. Instead, she reached out and touched the page of the book, her finger tracing the picture of the moon, leaving tiny smudges on the glossy paper. It wasn't much, just a quiet moment between an old woman and a traumatized child. But to Rose, It felt like a miracle, as profound as a sunrise after the longest night. In that moment, she understood that love could grow in the smallest spaces, in the quietest moments, in the gentlest of touches, like flowers pushing through cracks in concrete. She held Emma close, feeling the steady rhythm of the child's breathing against her chest, and silently thanked God for this precious gift of trust, this first tender step toward healing. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Rose's living room floor as she opened her eyes. The usual silence of her home was replaced by the soft pitter-patter of tiny feet and occasional whispers. Rose sat up slowly in her armchair where she had dozed off, her joints stiff from sleeping in an awkward position, and watched the twins explore their surroundings with newfound courage. Emma stood on her tiptoes, running her small fingers along the spines of old books on the bottom shelf, pausing now and then to trace the embossed letters. Lily wandered near the grandfather clock, her head tilted back to stare at its towering height, her mouth forming a small O of wonder. The steady tick-tock seemed to fascinate her, and she swayed slightly with each sound. "Would you girls like to play outside?" Rose asked softly, not wanting to startle them. Her voice was gentle, like a warm breeze. "The snow looks beautiful this morning." Both girls froze, turning to look at her with uncertain eyes, their bodies tensing slightly. Emma instinctively moved closer to her sister, protective as always, her small hand reaching for Lily's. Rose smiled warmly and walked to the coat closet, pulling out 3 pairs of mittens and some old scarves that still smelled faintly of cedar. "Look how sparkly it is," Rose said, pointing out the window where the sun made the snow glitter like diamonds. She helped them bundle up in warm layers, making sure every button was secure and each zipper was fully closed. Lily giggled when Rose wrapped a scarf around her face, leaving just her eyes visible, and the sound made Rose's heart leap. The backyard was a pristine blanket of white, untouched except for a few bird tracks near the feeder. Rose stepped out first, leaving footprints in the untouched snow, testing it to make sure it wasn't too deep for the girls. She scooped up a handful of the powdery white stuff and tossed it into the air, letting it rain down around her like stardust. "See? It's like fairy dust." Lily's eyes widened with delight, the brown irises sparkling, and a small laugh escaped her lips, the first real laugh Rose had heard from either of them. The sound was like music, pure and sweet, filling the winter air with joy and making the morning seem even brighter. Emma watched from the doorway, her small face serious as she studied Rose playing with her sister, her eyes darting between them like a tiny guardian. Then, slowly, cautiously, she stepped forward. Her tiny mittened hands reached down and gathered some snow, packing it carefully. She looked at Rose, as if asking permission, before throwing it up just like Rose had done. Soon, the quiet backyard was filled with the sounds of play and muffled giggles. Lily flopped backward into the snow, waving her arms and legs to make snow angels, leaving perfect impressions in the white powder. Emma, gaining confidence with each passing minute, started to gather snow into a small pile, attempting to build something with determined concentration. Rose helped her pack it together, showing her how to make a proper snowman. "Like this," Rose demonstrated, rolling a snowball bigger and bigger across the yard. Emma's eyes lit up with understanding, and she began to help, pushing with all her might, her face scrunched up with effort. Lily abandoned her snow angel to join them, adding handfuls of snow wherever she could reach, her excitement making her bounce on her toes. Rose felt tears welling up in her eyes as she watched them work together, their small bodies moving with purpose. Their rosy cheeks and bright eyes reminded her so much of the children she'd lost, the sons who never got to play in the snow, never got to build snowmen or make snow angels. But instead of the usual sharp pain, she felt something different. A warm gratitude that she could give these moments to Emma and Lily, that she could witness their joy and help create their memories. As the sky began to turn pink with sunset, painting the snow in soft rose hues, Rose noticed their small shoulders shivering beneath their coats. "Time to go in, my dears," she said gently, brushing snow from their shoulders. "Who wants hot cocoa?" Back inside, she wrapped them in soft blankets, tucking the edges around their feet, and prepared 3 mugs of hot chocolate, adding extra marshmallows to the girls' cups and a sprinkle of cinnamon to her own. They sat by the fireplace, sipping quietly, their faces glowing with contentment. The room felt different now, alive, warm, full of unspoken possibilities and new beginnings. Rose looked around her living room, at the wet boots by the door, the damp mittens drying by the fire, and the 2 small girls curled up with their cocoa, their eyelids growing heavy with satisfied exhaustion. The house that had felt so empty for so long now hummed with life, filled with the gentle sounds of breathing and the occasional clink of mugs against teeth. Rose's heart felt full to bursting, and for the first time in years she felt truly at home. The afternoon light dimmed as clouds rolled across the sky. Rose's heart skipped when she spotted the silver sedan pulling up to her house. Through the window, she watched Claire Donovan step out, her navy blazer crisp despite the cold, clipboard tucked firmly under her arm. Rose's hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. The twins, who had been playing quietly with some old wooden blocks in the corner, sensed the change in atmosphere. Emma immediately moved closer to Lily, their shoulders touching. "Mrs. Bennet," Claire greeted as Rose opened the door. Her tone was professional, neither warm nor cold. "I'm here for our scheduled check-in." Rose nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Of course, would you like some tea?" "No, thank you. This won't take long." Claire's heels clicked against the hardwood floors as she moved through the house, her pen scratching against paper as she took notes. "How are they adjusting?" Claire asked, watching the twins from across the room. Rose straightened her spine, lifting her chin slightly. "They're making progress every day. Just yesterday, Lily laughed for the first time. Emma's starting to trust me enough to sit in my lap. They're healing, Ms. Donovan." Claire's expression remained neutral as she wrote something down. "And how are you managing physically? The lifting, the constant supervision?" "I may be 72, but I'm perfectly capable," Rose replied, her voice firm. "I've child-proofed the house. I have emergency numbers posted by every phone. My neighbor checks in daily." Claire moved to the kitchen, inspecting the cupboards and refrigerator. "Your financial situation?" "My pension is stable and I have significant savings. Harold made sure I'd be taken care of." Rose followed her, watching as Claire examined the twins' breakfast dishes drying on the rack. After what felt like hours, Claire flipped to a new page on her clipboard. "You're doing well, Mrs. Bennet," she admitted, "but we still need to determine what's best for them long-term." Rose felt her chest tighten. "They need stability, Ms. Donovan. They need someone who understands their pain. They're starting to feel safe here." Claire's eyes softened slightly, but her professional demeanor didn't crack. "I understand, but there's still a long process ahead. I'll return with an update soon." Rose walked her to the door, her stomach churning as Claire's car pulled away. Through the window, she watched until the vehicle disappeared around the corner, knowing this was far from over. The grandfather clock ticked softly in the corner as Rose rocked back and forth, her knitting needles clicking together in a gentle rhythm. The living room glowed with warmth from the dying fire, casting long shadows across the wooden floor where Emma and Lily sat playing with blocks Rose had found in her attic. They were old toys, ones she'd saved from her own childhood, and watching the twins stack them carefully made her heart ache with tenderness. Lily had been arranging the blocks in neat rows, but now she stopped, her small hands going still. She lifted her head, dark curls falling across her forehead as she looked at Rose with eyes that seemed far too old for her 3 years. "Are you gonna leave us too?" The words came out barely above a whisper, trembling with fear and hope. Rose's knitting slipped from her fingers, landing softly in her lap. The question pierced straight through her heart, making it hard to breathe for a moment. Emma went rigid beside her sister, her tiny fists clenching as she waited for Rose's answer. The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. Setting her knitting aside carefully, Rose leaned forward in her chair. "Come here, sweetheart," she said softly, holding out her arms. Lily hesitated for just a moment before climbing into Rose's lap, her blanket trailing behind her like a security shield. "Never," Rose said, her voice gentle but filled with conviction. "I swear to you, never." She wrapped her arms around Lily's small frame, feeling the child's rapid heartbeat against her chest. "I will never leave you, not ever." Emma watched them intently from her spot on the floor, her eyes narrow and calculating, searching Rose's face for any sign of deception. Rose met her gaze steadily, letting all the love she felt show in her expression. "But Mommy said that too," Lily whispered into Rose's shoulder, her voice breaking. "She said she'd come back." Rose's throat tightened with emotion, but she kept her voice steady. "I know people have hurt you, precious girl. I know they broke their promises." She stroked Lily's hair softly. "But I'm different. I'm your grandma now, and grandmas don't leave. We stay and we love and we protect. Always." Emma shifted closer to the rocking chair, still watching, still uncertain, but something in Rose's words seemed to reach her. Rose extended her free arm, leaving the choice to Emma. "I choose you," Rose continued softly. "Both of you. And I will choose you every single day for the rest of my life. That's my promise." Lily's small arms tightened around Rose's neck, and for the first time since they arrived, Emma didn't pull away when Rose reached for her. Instead, she moved closer, allowing Rose to draw her into the embrace. They sat there together, the fire crackling softly, while Rose rocked them gently and hummed an old lullaby. She could feel the moment when some of the tension left Emma's shoulders, when Lily's breathing became steady and calm. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patches on the worn linoleum floor. Rose moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, stirring a pot of cinnamon oatmeal while humming an old tune her mother used to sing. The sweet, spicy aroma filled every corner of the room, making it feel more like home than it had in years. At the kitchen table, Emma and Lily sat in their matching blue pajamas, their dark curls still messy from sleep. Lily rubbed her eyes with tiny fists, while Emma watched Rose's every movement, as she always did. Their bare feet dangled from the chairs, not quite reaching the floor. Rose sprinkled brown sugar over the steaming bowls of oatmeal, making sure to add extra for Lily, who had developed quite a sweet tooth. "Here we go," she said softly, placing the first bowl in front of Emma. The steam rose in delicate swirls between them. As Rose turned to get Lily's bowl, she heard it, so quiet she almost missed it. A whisper, timid but clear. "Grandma." Rose's hands trembled, and she gripped the counter to steady herself. Her heart seemed to stop, then start again with a thundering beat. Slowly, carefully, she turned back around. Emma sat there, her head bent low over her bowl, stirring the oatmeal with intense concentration. Her cheeks had turned pink, and she wouldn't look up. Beside her, Lily's face broke into a wide grin. "Told you she'd like it," Lily giggled, nudging her sister with her elbow. Emma's blush deepened, but the corners of her mouth twitched upward. Rose felt tears welling up in her eyes. That one word, grandma, held everything she'd been hoping for. Trust, acceptance, love. She blinked rapidly, not wanting to overwhelm Emma with too strong a reaction. The little girl was still so careful with her emotions, still testing the waters of their relationship. Instead, Rose picked up Lily's bowl and placed it in front of her, letting her hand rest briefly on Emma's shoulder as she passed. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Emma finally looked up, meeting Rose's eyes for a brief moment. In that glance, Rose saw all the fear and hope that filled the little girl's heart. Then Emma ducked her head again, but this time with a small smile playing on her lips. Rose turned to wipe away a tear that had escaped, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She wasn't just Rose anymore. She was their grandma. The word echoed in her mind, precious and perfect. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that these girls were meant to be hers, and she was meant to be theirs. The evening settled softly around Rose's Victorian home, wrapping it in a gentle quiet that felt like a warm embrace. Inside, the fireplace crackled steadily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Rose sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of chamomile tea warming her arthritis-stiff hands as she watched Emma and Lily sprawled on their stomachs near the hearth. The twins were absorbed in their coloring, their dark curls falling forward as they bent over their shared piece of paper. Lily's tongue poked out slightly in concentration as she carefully filled in a flower with purple crayon. Emma, ever the protective older sister, occasionally reached over to help keep her sister's strokes within the lines. Rose felt her heart swell with a contentment she hadn't known in decades. The emptiness that had haunted these rooms for so long had been replaced by something precious and real. Even the old grandfather clock's ticking seemed more cheerful, as if it too celebrated the new life in the house. The sharp ring of the telephone cut through the peaceful scene like a knife. Rose startled, nearly spilling her tea. The twins looked up briefly before returning to their artwork, but Rose felt a sudden chill despite the room's warmth. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the receiver. "Hello, Mrs. Bennett?" Claire Donovan's professional tone came through clearly. "I need to discuss something important with you." Rose's fingers tightened around the phone. "Yes?" "We've found the twins' biological mother." The words hit Rose like a physical blow. Before she could process them, Claire continued, "She wants them back." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Rose gripped the small table beside her chair, struggling to keep her voice steady. "What do you mean? Where has she been all this time?" "I can't discuss the details over the phone," Claire replied, "but we're legally obligated to investigate her claim and condition before making any decisions." Rose watched as Lily showed her sister a blue butterfly she'd drawn, their small faces lit with simple joy. The sight made her chest ache. These precious girls who had finally started to trust, to speak, to laugh, who had called her grandma just that morning. "Mrs. Bennett, are you there?" "Yes," Rose managed, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. What happens now?" "We'll need to schedule a meeting to discuss the next steps. For now, everything stays as is while we conduct our investigation." The conversation ended with details Rose barely registered. She set the phone down with shaking hands, feeling as though she'd aged 10 years in those few minutes. The twins continued coloring, unaware that their world might be about to change again. The word echoed in Rose's mind as she watched them. This can't be happening. Not when they were finally healing. Not when they were finally safe. The morning sun filtered weakly through the lace curtains, casting pale shadows across Rose's living room. Her hands shook as she poured her morning tea, spilling a few drops onto the worn tablecloth. She dabbed at them absently, her mind elsewhere. Near the fireplace, Emma and Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, building a tower with wooden blocks, their quiet concentration a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Rose's heart. A sharp knock cut through the peaceful scene. Rose's teacup clinked against its saucer as she set it down. Her legs felt heavy as she made her way to the door, each step an effort against the dread building in her chest. When she opened the door, the sight before her made her breath catch. A young woman stood on the porch, her thin frame swimming in a threadbare jacket that offered little protection against the morning chill. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips cracked and pale, and her eyes held a desperate, haunted look that spoke of countless sleepless nights. Behind her stood Claire Donovan, the social worker, her professional demeanor barely masking her discomfort. "I want my babies back," Tara Wilson rasped, her knuckles white as she gripped the porch railing. Her voice cracked on the last word, a mixture of desperation and determination. Rose's stomach twisted violently. She gripped the doorframe, steadying herself. "They're finally starting to heal," she said, her voice low but firm. "They're just beginning to feel safe." "They're my children," Tara shot back, her voice rising. "I never meant to leave them. I couldn't." She trailed off, swallowing hard. Claire stepped forward, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "Mrs. Bennett, I understand your concerns, but Ms. Wilson has rights as their biological mother. She'll undergo a thorough assessment to determine her fitness for reunification." "Assessment?" Rose's voice trembled with barely contained anger. "Look at her. These girls need stability, not—" "I know I messed up," Tara interrupted, her words sharp with defensive anger. "But they're mine. I can do better. I will do better." The sound of raised voices drew tiny footsteps. Emma and Lily peered out from behind the couch, their eyes wide. Emma spotted Tara first, her small body going rigid. Lily, sensing her sister's distress, pressed closer to Rose's leg. Tara's anger crumpled into raw pain at the sight of her daughters. "Emma? Lily?" she whispered, reaching out one trembling hand. Lily whimpered and buried her face in Rose's sweater, her tiny fingers digging into the soft wool. Emma remained frozen, her face a mask of confusion and fear. Rose felt bile rising in her throat as she watched the scene unfold, her heart breaking for everyone involved. The desperate mother, the frightened children, and yes, even herself. The evening settled heavily over Rose's house, wrapping it in shadows that seemed deeper than usual. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, each sound echoing like a hammer against Rose's heart. In the kitchen, she moved mechanically through the motions of preparing dinner, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred the pot of chicken soup. "Girls, dinner's ready," she called, trying to keep her voice light and steady. Emma and Lily shuffled to the table, their usual chatter absent. Emma climbed onto her chair, her dark eyes watching Rose's every move. Lily hugged her stuffed rabbit close, her small fingers fidgeting with its worn ear. Rose ladled the soup into bowls, adding extra crackers, the way they liked it. But tonight, neither twin seemed interested in eating. Emma pushed her spoon through the broth, making little waves but never lifting it to her mouth. Lily just stared at her bowl, her lower lip quivering. "Are we leaving?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Rose's hand froze mid-reach for the salt shaker. Her chest tightened painfully, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, steadily. She had to be strong for them. "No one is taking you anywhere right now," she said carefully, reaching across the table to squeeze Lily's small hand. The words felt hollow in her mouth, even as she tried to believe them herself. Emma's spoon clattered against her bowl. "She came back," she said, her voice flat. "She always comes back and then leaves again." Rose's heart cracked at the resignation in Emma's voice. No child should sound so knowing about abandonment. She pushed back from the table and opened her arms. Both girls immediately slid from their chairs and rushed to her, pressing against her sides like frightened birds seeking shelter. "I've got you," Rose whispered, holding them close. "I've got you right now." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Rose helped them wash up, read them their favorite story about the little lost kitten who finds a home, and tucked them into bed. But everything felt different, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. After the girls fell asleep, Rose sat in the old rocking chair beside their bed, watching their peaceful faces in the soft glow of the nightlight. Lily's thumb had found its way to her mouth, something she only did when she was truly upset. Emma's small hand gripped her sister's pajama sleeve, protective even in sleep. Rose reached out, gently stroking their dark curls. "I won't let you go without a fight," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise you that." The night stretched on, but Rose couldn't bring herself to leave their room. She sat there, rocking slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. Should she call a lawyer? Did she have any legal standing at all? The questions swirled in her mind like autumn leaves in a storm. Through the window, the moon cast silver light across the twin beds, reminding Rose of another night, decades ago, when she sat in a different rocking chair, watching over two other precious lives. She hadn't been able to save them then, but these girls, these beautiful, fragile girls who had somehow found their way to her door, she would fight for them with everything she had. The morning sun cast long shadows across Rose's bedroom as she pulled herself out of bed, her joints protesting the early hour. But there was no time to waste. The twins were still asleep, curled up together in their makeshift bed, and Mrs. Johnson from next door had agreed to watch them. Rose dressed carefully, choosing her warmest sweater and comfortable shoes. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned her coat, but her determination steadied them. She had to find out more about Tara, not just for the twins' sake, but to understand what had driven a mother to leave her children in the snow. The streets of Maple Falls were quiet as Rose drove through town, her old station wagon humming softly. She stopped first at the police station, but they couldn't share any information. The hospital was equally unhelpful. Finally, she pulled into Sally's diner where locals gathered to share both coffee and gossip. The bell chimed as she pushed open the door. Warm air wrapped around her, carrying the scent of coffee and fresh-baked pie. Behind the counter, Darlene, a woman Rose knew from church, looked up with a tired smile. "Rose Bennett? Haven't seen you in here for ages," Darlene said, already reaching for the coffee pot. Rose settled onto a worn vinyl stool, her voice low. "Darlene, I need to ask you something. Do you know anything about a young woman named Tara Wilson?" Darlene's hand stilled on the coffee pot. She glanced around the nearly empty diner before leaning closer. "That poor thing? She comes in sometimes, when she can scrape together enough for a cup of coffee. Sleeps behind the old Pinewood Motel most nights." Rose's chest tightened. "Behind the motel? In this weather?" Darlene nodded, her lined face creased with concern. "Lost her job at the grocery store 3 months ago. Before that, she was cleaning houses, but..." She shook her head. Things just kept getting worse for her. Rose wrapped her hands around the warm coffee mug, thinking of the twins in their thin nightgowns that first night. "Has she always been unstable?" "She tries," Darlene said softly. "I've seen her filling out job applications, but something's broken in that girl. She needs help, but won't take it from anyone." Rose thanked Darlene and left, her heart heavy. The Pinewood Motel sat at the edge of town, its faded sign barely readable. She parked in the back lot and walked carefully around the building. There, huddled against the wall, was Tara. She wore the same thin jacket from yesterday, her dark hair tangled around her face. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, trying to hold in what little warmth she had left. Rose stood frozen, watching her. This was what the twins would be returning to. A mother who couldn't even keep herself safe, let alone 2 small children. But as she watched Tara shiver in the morning cold, something else stirred in Rose's heart. Not just concern for the twins, but a deep, aching pity for this broken young woman who had nowhere else to go. She thought of her own lost boys, of all the love she'd never gotten to give them. Now here was someone else's child, just as lost, just as in need of help. Rose knew what she had to do, but the weight of it settled heavy in her chest. The bitter wind cut through Rose's coat as she approached the huddled figure behind the motel. Tara Wilson sat with her back against the grimy wall, her thin jacket offering little protection from the cold. Empty coffee cups and food wrappers scattered around her told a story of desperate survival. When Tara spotted Rose, her body tensed like a cornered animal. Her eyes, dark with exhaustion, narrowed with defensive hostility. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, voice rough from the cold. Rose felt her heart squeeze at the sight. Despite her earlier anger, seeing Tara like this, young, broken, and alone, stirred something deep inside her. Without hesitation, she lowered herself to one knee, ignoring the protest of her joints. "Come with me," Rose said softly, extending her hand. Tara stared at the offered hand as if it might burn her. "Why would you help me?" she whispered, confusion and suspicion warring in her expression. "I tried to take them from you." Rose met her gaze steadily. "Because I was you once," she replied, her voice carrying the weight of old memories. Tara's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her. "You don't understand," she muttered, pulling her jacket tighter. "I tried. I really tried. But everything..." Her voice cracked. "Everything kept falling apart. No money, no job, no one would help me." Tears leaked from Tara's eyes as she continued. "I couldn't even feed them properly. They were always hungry, always cold. I thought..." She swallowed hard. "I thought they'd be better off without me." Rose listened, her heart aching. She saw beyond the defensive anger now, beyond the accusations. She saw a mother drowning in circumstances too big for her to handle alone. "There's a shelter," Rose offered gently. "They can help you get back on your feet, give you a warm place to sleep, help you find work." "I don't need pity," Tara cut in sharply, but her voice trembled. Rose pushed herself to her feet, brushing off her pants. She looked down at the younger woman, her voice firm but kind. Then get up and fight for them the right way. Tara's hands clenched into fists, but she turned her face away, unable to meet Rose's eyes. The wind howled between them, carrying the weight of choices yet to be made. Rose sat in the shelter's waiting area, her fingers drumming anxiously against her worn leather purse. The clock on the wall ticked away minutes that felt like hours. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped, only to sink again when another stranger walked through. "Mrs. Bennett?" Sarah, the shelter coordinator, approached with a steaming cup of tea. "You've been here 3 hours. Maybe she's not coming." Rose accepted the tea but shook her head firmly. "I'll wait a little longer." Her arthritis was acting up, making her joints ache, but she wouldn't budge. Not yet. The sun had started its descent when the door creaked open once more. Tara Wilson stood in the entrance, her thin frame casting a long shadow across the floor. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for escape routes. "I don't know why I came," Tara muttered, taking a hesitant step forward, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Rose set down her cold tea. "Because you want to do right by your daughters," she said simply, her voice gentle but firm. Tara's legs seemed to give out as she sank into the chair across from Rose, her gaze fixed on the floor, studying the worn linoleum as if it held answers to questions she couldn't voice. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Rose watched Tara's hands twist in her lap, noticed the dirt under her fingernails, the raw skin around her knuckles. This wasn't a monster who abandoned her children. This was a scared young woman who'd run out of options. "Let me help you get back on your feet," Rose said finally, leaning forward. "And when you're ready, we'll figure out what's best for the girls. Together." Tara's head snapped up, her eyes glistening with tears. "Why would you help me?" Her voice cracked. "I left them in the snow. I'm horrible." "You're their mother," Rose replied, "and they need you to be strong now." Sarah returned with paperwork and shelter guidelines. As she explained the rules, curfew, mandatory counseling, job search assistance, Tara's tears fell freely. But she signed every form, her hand trembling but determined. When everything was settled, Sarah led Tara toward the residential wing where she would stay. At the hallway entrance, Tara paused and looked back at Rose. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. Rose nodded, her own throat too tight for words. She watched Tara disappear down the corridor, knowing this was just the beginning of a long journey for all of them. The shelter's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Rose watched Tara from across the room. The young mother sat straight-backed in her chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap as she nodded along to what the caseworker was saying. Her brown hair was freshly washed, pulled back in a neat ponytail, a small but noticeable change from the tangled mess it had been a week ago. "We have several entry-level positions available," the caseworker explained, spreading papers across the desk. "There's a position at the local grocery store, and the diner is hiring servers." Tara's fingers twisted nervously, but her voice remained steady. "I've done waitressing before. I was good at it. Before." She trailed off, the weight of her past mistakes visible in the slump of her shoulders. After the meeting, Rose and Tara sat in the shelter's small break room. The coffee was bitter, but the warmth was welcome. Steam rose from their mugs, creating lazy spirals in the air between them. "So, what happens now?" Tara asked, her voice small but determined. Her hands wrapped around the coffee mug as if drawing strength from its warmth. Rose looked at her steadily, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her borrowed sweater hung loose on her thin frame. "Now, you prove to yourself that you can do this." Tara nodded slowly, but her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "What if I mess up again? What if I'm just not cut out for this?" Her voice cracked slightly. "I look at Emma and Lily and they're so perfect. They deserve better than what I gave them." "Nobody becomes a perfect parent overnight," Rose said gently. "The fact that you're here, trying, that matters." "Does it?" Tara's eyes filled with tears. I left them in the snow, Rose. What kind of mother does that? A desperate one, Rose replied softly. But you're not that person anymore. You're here now, doing the work. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the vending machine filling the space between them. Later that evening, Rose drove home alone. The setting sun painted the snow-covered streets in shades of pink and gold. Her eyes caught the empty car seats in the rearview mirror, the ones where Emma and Lily usually sat singing silly songs or playing with their stuffed animals. The silence in her car felt heavy. She missed their gentle chatter, their giggles, even their occasional tears. Her house would be quiet tonight. No bedtime stories, no small feet padding across the floor, no whispered grandma before sleep. Rose pulled into her driveway, the familiar sight of her Victorian home offering little comfort. The twins' mittens still hung by the door, waiting to be worn again. Their presence lingered in every corner, making the emptiness feel even more profound. The phone's ring pierced the quiet morning air. Rose's hand trembled as she reached for it, recognizing Claire Donovan's number on the caller ID. Mrs. Bennett? Claire's voice was gentle. Would you like to visit the twins? Rose's heart leaped in her chest, her free hand clutching the kitchen counter for support. Yes, she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, please. 20 minutes later, Rose pulled up to a modest two-story house on Oak Street. The winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered lawn. Her hands shook slightly as she turned off the engine, remembering how quiet the house had felt without the twins' presence. Before she could even step out of the car, the front door flew open with a bang. Two small figures burst out onto the porch, their faces lit up with joy. Grandma! Lily's voice rang out clear and strong, so different from the whispers of just weeks ago. She ran through the snow, her pink boots leaving tiny footprints, her arms already reaching up. Emma was right behind her sister, moving faster than Rose had ever seen her move before. Their winter coats weren't even zipped properly, but they didn't seem to care. Rose dropped to her knees in the snow, not caring about the cold seeping through her pants. She caught them both in her arms, holding them close as they crashed into her. Lily buried her face in Rose's neck while Emma gripped her coat so tightly her knuckles turned white. I missed you, Lily chanted, her words muffled against Rose's scarf. Emma didn't speak, but her tight grip said everything. I missed you too, my darlings, Rose whispered, her voice cracking. Every single day. She pulled back slightly to look at their faces, drinking in the sight of them. Their cheeks were rosy from the cold, their dark curls escaping from their winter hats. Did you get our pictures? Emma asked softly, finally finding her voice. We made them for you. Not yet, sweetheart, Rose said, smoothing Emma's hair back from her face. But I can't wait to see them. From the porch, Tara stood watching, her arms wrapped around herself. Her expression was hard to read, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty, maybe even a touch of jealousy. But there was something else there too, something new in the way she observed the reunion. She was seeing, perhaps for the first time, just how deeply the twins had bonded with Rose. Rose caught her eye over the twins' heads and gave her a small, gentle nod. Tara returned it hesitantly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Can we show Grandma our room? Lily asked, tugging at Rose's sleeve. We have new books. Please? Emma added, her voice still quiet but eager. Rose held them close for one more moment, savoring their warmth, their trust, their love. These precious girls who had stumbled into her life on a snowy night had changed everything. And as she looked up at Tara again, she saw the young mother's expression soften just a little more. The evening settled over the small apartment like a heavy blanket. The soft whirring of the heater mixed with the distant sound of traffic outside, creating a gentle backdrop to the silence between Rose and Tara. They sat in mismatched chairs, steam rising from their mugs of chamomile tea. Through the thin walls, they could hear the twins' steady breathing from the bedroom. Rose watched as Tara's eyes kept drifting toward the bedroom door, her fingers fidgeting with the frayed edge of her sweater sleeve. They love you, Tara finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. She gripped her mug tighter, her knuckles turning white. I saw it today, the way they ran to you, how they trust you. Rose looked up, caught off guard by the raw honesty in Tara's voice. "And they love you," she replied gently, watching Tara's face carefully. Tara shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. "They're better with you." The words seemed to pain her as they came out, each one carrying the weight of her guilt and regret. "I see how natural it is for you, how you know exactly what they need." The clock on the wall ticked steadily as silence filled the room again. Rose watched as Tara brushed away a tear with the back of her hand. "I keep thinking about all the ways I could mess up again," Tara continued, her voice shaking. "Every time I try to do better, something goes wrong. I lose another job, or the rent money runs out, or—" She trailed off, staring into her tea as if it held answers. "I wanted to hate you," she admitted after a moment. "When I first saw you with them, I wanted to believe you were trying to steal them from me. But you're—" She swallowed hard. "You're everything they deserve in a mother. Everything I'm not." Rose set her mug down carefully. "That's not true, Tara." "Isn't it?" Tara's laugh was hollow. "Look at this place. Look at me. I'm living in a shelter trying to piece together some kind of life. Meanwhile, you have a real home, stability, wisdom." Her voice cracked. "They deserve that." From the bedroom came the soft sound of Lily mumbling in her sleep. Both women turned toward the sound, their hearts tugging in the same direction. "I don't want to lose them," Tara whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Her hands trembled as she set down her mug, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Rose moved without hesitation, reaching across the space between them to place her weathered hand over Tara's. "Then let's figure this out together." The winter sun hung low in the afternoon sky as Rose pulled into the park's empty parking lot. Her arthritis-stiffened fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with possibilities. What did Tara want to discuss? The twins were doing well in their temporary arrangement, but uncertainty still clouded their future. She spotted Tara's slim figure by the frozen pond, a lonely silhouette against the stark white landscape. Taking a deep breath, Rose grabbed her cane and carefully made her way across the snow-dusted path. Tara didn't turn as Rose approached, her eyes fixed on the ice-covered water. Her breath came out in small, visible puffs in the cold air. She had changed in the past weeks. There was a steadiness to her now, though exhaustion still lined her face. "I've been thinking a lot," Tara said when Rose reached her side. Her voice was quiet but clear, carrying over the winter stillness. Rose waited, her heart beating faster. Tara pushed her hands deeper into her coat pockets, her shoulders tense. "I love them, but I think they belong with you." Tears welled up in Rose's eyes, blurring her vision. She gripped her cane tighter, overwhelmed by emotion. "I see how they are with you," Tara continued, her voice cracking slightly. "How they trust you, how they feel safe. I want that for them more than anything." She turned to face Rose, her own eyes glistening. "But I don't want to disappear. I can't bear the thought of losing them completely." Rose's throat felt tight as she listened. Tara wiped roughly at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I was thinking, maybe we could raise them together." Tara's voice was barely above a whisper. "You would be their primary guardian, but I could still be part of their lives. I could work on getting better, proving myself while knowing they're safe and loved." Rose nodded, emotion making it hard to speak. When she finally found her voice, it came out strong and sure. "We'll do it together," she promised. Tara let out a shaky breath, tears slipping freely down her face now. The tension seemed to drain from her body, replaced by something that looked like hope. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Rose sat straight-backed in the hard wooden chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap to hide their trembling. Beside her, Tara fidgeted with the sleeve of her new blouse, the one Rose had helped her pick out for this important day. Claire Donovan stood before the judge explaining their unusual request. "Your Honor, both parties have agreed to a shared guardianship arrangement. Mrs. Bennett will provide primary residence and care, while Ms. Wilson will maintain regular visitation and involvement in the children's lives." The twins sat between Rose and Tara, their small legs swinging beneath the chairs. Emma reached for Rose's hand while Lily leaned against Tara's arm. The sight made Rose's heart swell. They no longer had to choose between the two women who loved them. After what felt like hours of legal discussion, the judge finally nodded. Given the unique circumstances and the clear benefit to the children, I'm approving this arrangement. He smiled warmly at both women. It's refreshing to see two parties working together instead of against each other. Back at Rose's house, their house now, Lily tugged at Rose's sleeve. Does this mean we get to stay with Grandma forever? Her eyes were wide with hope and uncertainty. Rose knelt down, gathering both twins close. Yes, sweetheart, this is your home now. She looked up at Tara, who stood nearby with tears glistening in her eyes. And your mama will always be part of your life too. Really? Emma whispered, glancing between them. Promise? Tara stepped forward, dropping to her knees beside Rose. She pulled both girls into a tight hug, her voice thick with emotion. I promise, baby. I'm not going anywhere. She met Rose's gaze over the twins' heads. We're all family now. That evening, after a celebration dinner of mac and cheese, the twins' favorite, Rose watched from the doorway as Tara tucked the girls into bed. She sang them a soft lullaby, one she remembered from her own childhood, while smoothing their dark curls. Good night, my sweet girls, Tara whispered, pressing gentle kisses to their foreheads. Night, Mama, Lily mumbled sleepily. Night, Grandma, Emma added, her eyes already closed. As they left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar, Rose noticed how Tara's shoulders had changed. The defensive tension was gone, replaced by something softer, more peaceful. They weren't enemies anymore, weren't even just reluctant allies. They were something new, something better. They were family. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the snow-covered streets of Maple Falls as Rose's car pulled up to her Victorian home. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as she put the car in park. In the back seat, Emma and Lily sat quietly, their new winter coats making soft rustling sounds as they peered through the windows at their old home. We're here, Rose said softly, her voice warm with emotion. She helped the girls out of their car seats, their tiny boots crunching in the fresh snow as they made their way up the familiar path. The house welcomed them with its familiar creaks and warmth as Rose opened the door. The fireplace crackled merrily, just as she'd left it before heading out. The girls stood in the entrance for a moment, taking in the sight of their old sanctuary. Lily was the first to move, her small feet padding across the wooden floor as she touched the worn armchair where Rose used to read them stories. Emma followed more slowly, her hand trailing along the wall until she reached the window seat where they'd spent countless hours watching snowfall. Everything's still here, Emma whispered, her voice filled with wonder. She turned to Rose, her eyes wide with hope and uncertainty. Is this really our home forever? Rose knelt down carefully, her arthritis protesting the movement, but she didn't care. She gently cupped their faces in her weathered hands, looking into their matching dark eyes. Yes, she promised, her voice steady and sure. Forever. Lily launched herself into Rose's arms with a small cry, burying her face in Rose's neck. Emma hesitated for just a moment before joining her sister, their combined weight nearly knocking Rose off balance. She held them close, breathing in the sweet scent of their hair. Throughout the afternoon, the girls rediscovered their home. They unpacked their small bags, carefully placing their few possessions in the dresser drawers. Rose watched as they settled back into their old routine. Lily arranging her stuffed animals on her bed, Emma methodically organizing her books on the small shelf. As evening approached, there was a gentle knock at the door. Tara stood on the porch, holding a small bag of cookies she'd baked at the shelter's kitchen. The girls ran to hug her, and Rose felt her heart warm at the sight. This was how it should be. Not two women fighting over the children, but a family working together. They shared dinner around the kitchen table, all four of them, and Rose marveled at how natural it felt. Tara helped the girls with their bedtime routine before saying goodnight, promising to visit again soon. Later that night, Rose sat in her old rocking chair, watching the twins sleep peacefully in their beds. Lily's soft breathing mixed with Emma's occasional sighs, creating a lullaby she'd missed desperately. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a gentle glow over their sleeping forms. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything felt right. Rose's house was no longer just a house. It was truly a home again. The early December air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke through Maple Falls. Christmas lights twinkled from every storefront and house, casting warm glows against the fresh snow. Inside Rose's Victorian home, a small Fraser fir stood waiting in the corner of the living room, its branches reaching toward the ceiling. Emma and Lily watched with wide eyes as Rose unpacked ornaments from an old cardboard box. Their small hands fidgeted at their sides, clearly wanting to touch the shiny decorations but unsure if they were allowed. "Would you like to help?" Rose asked gently, holding out a wooden angel ornament. Lily stepped forward first, her tiny fingers wrapping carefully around the decoration. Emma followed, accepting a red knitted mitten ornament from Rose's outstretched hand. "We never had a Christmas tree before," Lily whispered, her voice tinged with wonder as she stared at the angel in her palm. Rose's heart clenched at the admission, but she kept her voice steady and warm. "Well, we'll make this the best Christmas ever." The front door opened, bringing in a rush of cold air and Tara, her arms full of wrapped presents. The twins' faces lit up at the sight of their mother, but they didn't abandon their ornaments. "Look what we're doing, Mommy," Lily called out, holding up her angel. Tara set down the gifts and joined them by the tree, her eyes soft as she watched her daughters carefully hang their ornaments. Rose handed her a delicate glass snowflake, and together, the 3 adults and 2 children began decorating the tree. Emma giggled when Rose lifted her up to place a star near the top. Lily clapped her hands when Tara plugged in the lights, making the tree sparkle. The room filled with warmth and laughter as they sipped hot cocoa with tiny marshmallows floating on top. Later, Rose helped the twins hang their stockings on the fireplace mantel, red ones with their names embroidered in gold thread. Lily traced the letters of her name with her finger while Emma hugged her stocking close as if afraid it might disappear. "These are really ours?" Emma asked softly. "Forever and always," Rose assured her, watching as both girls carefully arranged their stockings on the hooks. As the twins stepped back to admire their handiwork, giggling and pointing at how their stockings sparkled in the firelight, Rose felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. For the first time, these precious girls were experiencing the magic of Christmas with a family who loved them completely. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the small light above the stove. Rose sat at the worn oak table, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. The house had settled into that peculiar stillness that comes only in the deepest part of night. Through the window, she could see the Christmas lights still twinkling on the porch, casting colorful shadows across the fresh snow. Soft footsteps made her look up. Tara stood in the doorway, hesitant, like she wasn't sure she belonged. Her oversized sweater hung loose on her thin frame, but Rose noticed she looked healthier than when they'd first met behind that motel. "Can't sleep?" Rose asked softly, gesturing to the chair across from her. Tara shook her head and settled into the seat. Rose poured her a cup of chamomile tea, sliding it across the table. Tara wrapped her hands around the warm mug, staring into its depths as if searching for answers. Minutes ticked by on the old kitchen clock. Finally, Tara's voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper. "What if I mess up again?" The raw vulnerability in her voice made Rose's heart ache. She watched as Tara's fingers tightened around her mug, knuckles turning white. "The girls, they're so happy now," Tara continued, her voice trembling. "What if I ruin everything? What if I'm not strong enough?" Rose reached across the table, gently placing her hand over Tara's. "You won't," she said firmly, "because you're not doing this alone anymore." Tara looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I see how much you love them," Rose replied, "and because this time you have something you didn't have before, support. We're in this together." Tara let out a shaky breath, nodding slowly. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "I never thought—" She paused, collecting her thoughts. When I first saw you with them, I was so angry. I thought you were trying to take them from me, but you weren't, were you? You were just trying to give them what I couldn't. What we can now give them together, Rose corrected gently. The kitchen fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence, peaceful, understanding. Rose stood up, her joints creaking slightly. As she headed toward the doorway, she paused, looking back at the young woman who had become so much more than just her grandchildren's mother. They had come full circle, she realized, from that first confrontation filled with fear and anger to this moment of shared understanding. They weren't just co-guardians anymore. They were family. Tara caught her eye and smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. In that moment, Rose knew they would be okay. All of them together. The January sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Rose helped Tara carry the last box up 3 flights of stairs. The small apartment complex wasn't fancy, but it was clean and well-maintained. A fresh start for a woman who desperately needed one. "Careful with that one," Rose warned, steadying the cardboard box in Tara's arms. "Those are the dishes Mrs. Henderson donated." Inside, the twins were already exploring their mother's new home, their footsteps echoing on the bare floors. The apartment was modest. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with large windows that let in streams of winter light. The walls had been freshly painted a soft cream color, and the second-hand furniture they'd collected over the past weeks gave the space a lived-in feel. "Look, Mommy," Lily called out, pointing to the window. "You can see the park from here." Tara set down the box and walked to where her daughter stood. Her hands trembled slightly as she took in the view. Trees, playground equipment, and beyond that, the mountains that surrounded Maple Falls. This was really happening. She had a home. "I don't know if I can do this," she murmured, wrapping her arms around herself. Rose stepped beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You already are," she said firmly. "Look how far you've come." Emma appeared with a small box labeled Pictures and began pulling out frames. "Where should these go, Mommy?" Tara wiped her eyes quickly and turned to help her daughter. Together, they arranged photo frames on the windowsill, pictures of the twins as babies, recent ones from Christmas at Rose's house, and a new family photo showing all 4 of them together. As the afternoon wore on, the apartment slowly transformed. Curtains went up, dishes found their places in cupboards, and the twins' laughter filled every corner as they helped unpack. Tara moved through the rooms with growing confidence, arranging and rearranging until everything felt right. "The bed goes here," she decided, pushing the second-hand frame against the bedroom wall. "And the girls can have their own corner in the living room for when they visit." Rose watched as Tara created her space, saw the pride in her eyes as she made decisions about her home. This wasn't the same woman she'd found behind the motel months ago. This Tara stood taller, spoke clearer, moved with purpose. When the last box was emptied, they ordered pizza and sat on the floor together, using moving boxes as tables. The twins told stories about their day at school, and Tara listened intently, asking questions and laughing at their jokes. As the sun began to set, Rose gathered her keys. It was time to take the twins home. Tara hugged them tightly, promising to see them tomorrow for dinner. On the drive back, Rose glanced in her rearview mirror at the apartment building growing smaller behind them. Tara was no longer lost. She had a job at the local diner, a safe place to live, and most importantly, she had hope. She was building a future, one small step at a time. Late February brought a gentle thaw to Maple Falls, the heavy snow slowly retreating from sidewalks and rooftops. Rose sat in her favorite wicker chair on the porch, a warm cup of tea nestled between her weathered hands. Before her, Tara and the twins huddled around a small folding table, playing Go Fish with intense concentration. "Got any threes?" Emma asked, her dark curls falling into her eyes as she studied her cards. "Go Fish," Lily giggled, causing Tara to smile, a real smile that reached her eyes and softened the worry lines around her mouth. The scene before Rose seemed almost impossible just months ago. Tara had transformed from a frightened, defensive woman into someone who carried herself with quiet dignity. Her new job at the local diner was going well, and she hadn't missed a single visit with the twins. "Grandma, look!" Lily held up her cards triumphantly. I got all the queens. Rose nodded approvingly, her heart warming at the simple joy in Lily's voice. These moments, watching her family together, hearing laughter instead of silence, felt like miracles. Tara gathered the cards, her movements careful and deliberate. She looked up, meeting Rose's gaze with unexpected intensity. I don't know if I would have survived without you, she admitted softly, her voice catching slightly. Rose shook her head, setting her tea aside. You would have, she replied firmly, but I'm glad you didn't have to. The twins, sensing the emotional moment, abandoned their cards and climbed onto Tara's lap. Emma wrapped her arms around her mother's neck while Lily nestled against her chest, both giggling as Tara pretended to collapse under their weight. Mama's getting squished, Tara laughed, pulling them closer despite her protests. Rose watched them, remembering the frightened children who had appeared on her doorstep that snowy night. Now they were thriving, talking, laughing, trusting. Emma no longer flinched at sudden movements. Lily spoke above a whisper. They had both learned that love could be constant, not fleeting. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the porch. Rose's house, once so quiet it had felt like a tomb, now buzzed with the energy of family. Where emptiness had echoed, love now filled every corner. Tara caught her eye again, and a moment of understanding passed between them. They had become more than just co-guardians of the twins. They were family, bound together by love and choice rather than blood. Time for dinner, Rose announced, rising from her chair. Who's helping me make spaghetti? Me! Both twins shouted, scrambling off Tara's lap and racing toward the door. The sound of their footsteps, their laughter, their life, it filled Rose's heart completely. Her home was no longer just a house. It was alive again, just as she was. Early March brought a subtle shift to Maple Falls. The morning frost still clung to window panes, but beneath it, tiny shoots of green pushed through the thawing earth. Rose's kitchen filled with warm morning light as she sat at her well-worn oak table, carefully reviewing each legal document before her. Her reading glasses perched on her nose as she examined every word, making sure everything was perfect. Claire Donovan sat across from her, her usual professional demeanor softened by a genuine smile. The stack of papers between them represented months of work, countless meetings, and endless prayers. Tara fidgeted in her chair beside Rose, her fingers nervously tapping against the table's surface. It's official, Claire announced, sliding the final document across the table. The court has approved the shared guardianship arrangement. Rose drew in a sharp breath, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the paper. The weight of uncertainty that had pressed against her chest for months finally began to lift. Beside her, Tara let out a shaky exhale, reaching for Rose's free hand and squeezing it tightly. No more uncertainty, Tara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They have us. Both of us. Rose nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She thought of all the sleepless nights, all the fears and doubts, all the moments when it seemed impossible. Yet here they were. The sound of running feet and excited chatter announced the twins' arrival home from their morning at the park with their neighbor. They burst into the kitchen, cheeks pink from the crisp air, and immediately launched themselves into Rose's waiting arms. "Grandma," Lily exclaimed while Emma wrapped her arms around Rose's neck. Neither girl noticed the papers on the table or understood the significance of this moment, but they felt the love radiating through the room. That evening they celebrated with a simple dinner, Rose's homemade chicken soup and fresh bread. The kitchen rang with laughter as Lily told animated stories about their day, and Emma added quiet corrections to her sister's exaggerated tales. Tara helped serve dessert, warm apple pie, her movements more confident now, more at peace. When bedtime came, Rose followed her usual routine of tucking the girls into their beds. As she smoothed Emma's blanket, the little girl reached under her pillow and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Here, Grandma," she said softly, holding it out. Rose carefully unfolded it to find a crayon drawing. 4 figures holding hands in a line. The figures were drawn in bright colors, standing beneath a yellow sun and surrounded by red hearts. "That's you, Grandma, and Mommy and us forever," Lily whispered from her bed, her voice already heavy with sleep. Rose felt tears welling up as she leaned down to kiss each girl's forehead. Her heart felt so full it might burst. Forever. After all this time, after all the uncertainty and fear, they were finally, truly, a family. Forever. If you enjoyed the story of Mark, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.